Rest assured, people of El Salvador, that no pipsqueak, no puppet of imperialism like Bukele will separate the peoples of El Salvador and Venezuela. We will remain united. Bukele will dry up.
That's an old video of Nicolás Maduro, who was deposed in Venezuela just days ago in a U.S. military operation and arraigned in New York on drug charges. Nayib Bukele reposted it online upon his capture. But that version of Bukele was almost unrecognizable from the one who in 2022, when he was angry about U.S. anti-corruption sanctions, compared Joe Biden's policies to the United Fruit Company. I'm Roman Gressier, the editor of El Faro English. Welcome back to our weekly podcast, Central America in Minutes.
In Nicaragua, the house arrest of Daniel Ortega's brother
relates more to El Salvador and Honduras than to Guatemala. In the case of Guatemala,
they say globalism comes to die at CIPA, but in El Salvador, it's already dead.
Central America in Minutes, an original podcast by El Faro English.
The U.S. military's capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro sent a shockwave through Central America. In Nicaragua, a few hours after the attack, co-dictator Rosario Murillo called a meeting at the presidential residence to order a state of alert and increase state surveillance. Quote, she ordered increased surveillance of radical opposition elements, deportees from the United States, and on the possible formation of groups that disturb our peace, in scare quotes, reported the Nicaraguan digital outlet Confidencial. The Southern District of New York named Nicaragua in Maduro's indictment as a thoroughfare for alleged Venezuelan drug shipments. In El Salvador, de facto President Nayib Bukele mocked Maduro in the video on X, alongside a picture of Maduro in handcuffs. Bukele has deep ties to Venezuela. As El Faro revealed in 2021, among the most powerful figures in his government is a tight ring of informal Venezuela-born advisors tied to their home country's opposition. One of them, Sarahana, went with Bukele to the Oval Office last year. The ties are also financial. Revista Factum revealed that Bukele received $1.9 million in investment in 2013 from Alba Petróleos, a subsidiary of the Venezuelan state oil company, PDVSA. Bukele's chief ally in Central America, Costa Rican President Rodrigo Chavez, also celebrated. Now Maduro must answer for his crimes in Venezuela and abroad, he wrote. Guatemala's president, Bernardo Arévalo, who has declared himself a social democrat, but mostly governed conservatively and is an ally of Trump, has tried to find middle ground. In one statement posted to X, and for an end to, quote, any unilateral military action. It's worth recalling that his father, Juan José Arévalo, was the first president of the Guatemalan Revolution in the 1940s and a staunch critic of U.S. imperialism and European fascism. His son Bernardo has been critical of the Venezuelan regime since he was elected in 2023. In a second statement, he expressed support for the Venezuelan people in rebuilding democratic institutions. And in Honduras, where Trump pardoned convicted narco president Juan Orlando Hernández, outgoing president Xiomara Castro was the most vocal in her opposition. She called Maduro's kidnapping a, quote, affront to the sovereignty and independence of the peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as a complete disregard and moral defeat of the United Nations Charter and international law, close quote. That contrasts with President-elect Tito Esfura, who called for, quote, an orderly, peaceful, and constitutional transition in Caracas. Venezuela is an important ally to Castro, a major friction point with the United States. In 2024, when U.S. Ambassador Laura Dogu criticized a defense meeting between the two countries, Honduras responded by announcing that it would denounce its extradition treaty with the United States. But early in Trump's term, Honduras walked back the threat. Panama is even more revealing. Trump has threatened to retake the canal by force and strong-arm the country into pulling canal contracts from a Chinese company. President José Raúl Mulino walked a tightrope. On Tuesday, at a bicentennial event commemorating liberator Simón Bolívar, he declared Maduro illegitimate, stating that, quote, in Venezuela, the people spoke clearly and overwhelmingly at the polls in 2024. But he diverged from Trump on one key point, that he will not recognize the new president permitted by the Trump administration, Delcy Rodriguez, and that the transition must lead to 2024 opposition candidate Edmundo González Urrutia taking office. Central American Minutes is the best podcast to stay tapped into how U.S. policies are rippling through our region at its most critical time in decades. If our work has helped you stay informed, go to support.elfaro.net to help us keep translating Central America. Just weeks ago, the White House published a new national security strategy declaring a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine and asserting its dominance over the Western Hemisphere. And the Trump administration is now shaking up its envoys to Central America. On Thursday, Houston philanthropist Melinda Hildebrand arrived in Costa Rica as the new U.S. ambassador. Hildebrand and her husband Jeffrey, an oil exec, reported a net worth of upwards of $10 billion last year, according to the Houston Chronicle. And the Washington Post named the couple as major donors to Trump Victory, the fundraising committee for Donald Trump's 2020 campaign. Trump said Hildebrand will focus on trade and immigration. Her selection is another show of the State Department's closeness to the private sector in its Central American policy. Right before the elections in Honduras, Chris Landau, Undersecretary of State for the Western Hemisphere, criticized the election, citing key representatives of the business community in Honduras. And in Honduras, Trump has yet to nominate his new ambassador. Biden's pick, Dogu, who was critical of the current government's ties to Venezuela, left last year. The same goes for Guatemala, where Arevalo announced on Wednesday that Ambassador Tobin Bradley is leaving the embassy in the next few weeks. Bradley oversaw close cooperation, including the announcement of U.S. Army involvement in port renovation and of a third country asylum agreement. Trump even sent Arevalo a personal letter on Independence Day in September. But Bradley towed a delicate line. Miami Republican Maria Elvira Salazar called for his removal in November, joining the U.S.-sanctioned Attorney General in Guatemala, who, like Bukele, claimed the ambassador and other Biden-era officials had been interventionist in their anti-corruption policy. According to Arevalo, Bradley, a career diplomat, said he received a transfer order as part of a move to replace Biden-era ambassadors around the world. As for El Salvador, in December, Trump nominated Troy Edgar, a former top official at the Department of Homeland Security, right under Secretary Kristi Noem. Trump cemented close ties last year with El Salvador by rendering Venezuelan and Salvadoran migrants to the CCOT mega prison. In recent weeks, Trump and Bukele announced a reciprocal trade agreement to waive certain tariffs. The Committee on Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, or CISPES, wrote that, quote, Edgar's nomination likely opens the door to greater militarization in El Salvador, as well as closer coordination in surveillance, intelligence, and intensified deportations. Last we turned to Tapachula, the Mexican migrant town on the border with Guatemala. A new report by Cindy Espina in Plaza Pública shows that the number of undocumented migrants passing through Tapachula dramatically fell by 3/4 between 2024 and 2025. Here's Cindy talking about her investigation.
Migration from Central America to the United States has declined, and data on migratory movements demonstrate this. But that doesn't mean that it has stopped. Claiming this would render invisible the migrants who, despite the anti-migration policy imposed by Donald Trump, continue to migrate, showing that the root causes that form them to migrate still exist.
In late 2018, Tapachula was a thoroughfare for migrant caravans. In 2021, it became known as a ciudad cárcel, or prison city, for mass migrant detention and checkpoints. Now, Espina writes that in the city center, migrants no longer wait in long lines for remittances, and the cuarterias, or houses where migrants often rented rooms, are eerily empty. Thank you for streaming Central American Minutes, written by Juliana Ramazzini and me, Roman Gracier. All things sound designed by Amnian. Find us wherever you do your streaming, and we'll be back next week. Hasta pronto.